August 1995. Ries-Loselia State Prison, the crown jewel of the Danish justice system. A Victorian fortress of granite and iron designed to break the will of any man. Then, the silence of the night is obliterated. A 15-ton wheel loader, roaring like a prehistoric beast, slams into the perimeter wall. Brick dust explodes into the moonlight. 12 shadows sprint through the jagged breach into the cold forest. At the front is a man the guards thought they had finally conquered, Bo Larsen. This wasn't his first escape, it was his sixth. And for the authority, the nightmare was only beginning. They call him the Escape King, not out of respect, but out of a desperate, lingering fear. For 30 years, this one man turned the entire Danish legal system into a national joke. He didn't just break locks, he dismantled the very illusion of a maximum security prison. He walked out of front gates dressed as a janitor, nodding to the guards. He vanished into containers of rotting autumn leaves, riding garbage trucks to freedom. He sawed through steel bars with hacksaw blades hidden in the spines of Bibles. 22 times. That is the record. 22 times, the system built a bigger cage, installed more cameras, and hired harder men. And 22 times, the individual found the crack in the armor. By 2014, the laws of an entire nation were rewritten because of his name. Wardens were fired. Parliaments debated his shadow. He was a 38-kilogram ghost that no wall could contain and no chain could bind. But every addiction carries a lethal price. And for a man addicted to the pure, crystalline rush of the breakout, freedom would eventually become his deadliest cell. This is the psychological deconstruction of Europe's most unstoppable escape artist. 22 escapes, one man. The impossible myth of Bo Larsen starts now. 22 escapes, one man. If you're ready to see how a 38-kilogram ghost humiliated a nation, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss the mechanics of the impossible. 1989, Copenhagen. The world outside is changing, but for 15-year-old Bo Larsen, the world is a series of cold, locked rooms. He did not grow up reading fairy tales. He grew up reading the geometry of shadows. Raised under the heavy, alcoholic hand of a father who beat him bloody, Brian learned to run before he learned to speak his truth. His childhood was not a sanctuary. It was a revolving door of foster placements, juvenile detention centers, and police stations. The authority was not a protector, it was a predator. And Brian was its most restless prey. His fury was quiet, contained, and lethal. At 8, he stole his first car for a joyride, not for the status, but for the kinetic rush of outrunning the wind. At 13, he robbed a gas station with a bayonet pressed against the clerk's throat. His hands were shaking with adrenaline, but his voice was ice cold. He was testing the boundaries of the world, probing for the weak spots in the social contract. These stunts landed him in youth detention, but the walls were merely an invitation. One night, teenage Brian finds a door left unlocked after lights out. No guard watching, no alarm triggered. He simply walks through the threshold and vanishes into the dark, rain-slick streets of Copenhagen. By dawn, he is gone without a trace. His first escape. Something clicks behind his eyes, a realization that would dictate the next 30 years of his life. Walls are designed by people, and people are fundamentally flawed. Once free, Brian pushed harder. Over the next few years, he cycled through custody so fast that guards barely had time to memorize his face before he became a ghost again. He began to treat every lock as a puzzle, every routine as a rhythm to be mastered. He timed guard rotations down to the second, noting the exact moment a human eye blinks or a mind wanders. He realized that if a guard forgets to check a window for 30 seconds, or if paperwork opens a side exit, the maximum security illusion collapses. Young Larsen began to exploit these cracks with surgical precision. He was not a hulking mastermind. He was wiry, silent, and absolutely fearless. He hid in cleaning closets until the night shift thinned out. He used grease from dinner trays to slip his wrists through steel handcuffs. The system thought it was punishing him, but Brian knew better. He was in a laboratory. The state was not his jailer, it was his trainer. By the early 1990s, Brian had escaped a dozen times from jails, courthouses, and secure centers. Denmark's authorities were baffled. This skinny teenager treated locked doors like open invitations. They decided to transfer him somewhere with higher walls and harder men. At 21, Brian enters Vridzlozalila State Prison, a grim Victorian fortress built in 1859 to break the spirit of men. The message from the authority was absolute. This is where your games end. But as the heavy iron gates groaned shut, Brian was already cataloging the camera blind spots. He didn't know how he would break this fortress yet. He just knew, with the cold certainty of a god, that he would. The game of cat and mouse between Brian Bo Larsen and the Danish authorities enters its most surreal phase. By the late 1990s, the Escape King has transformed from a restless teenager into a surgical architect of the Breakout. He does not see walls. He sees the breath of the men who guard them. Through these years, every time the iron doors of a maximum security prison slam shut, Brian begins a silent countdown. His escapes come in every shape and size, each one a more creative insult to the state than the last. He is no longer just running. He is performing a series of impossible magic tricks. Once, he squeezes through a ventilation duct like a skeletal contortionist, scraping layers of skin off his shoulders to fit through a gap barely wider than a human skull. Another time, he acquires a janitor's uniform and a mop. With a polite nod to an oblivious guard, he simply strolls out the front entrance, a ghost in plain sight. Some escapes are laughably simple, slipping out a back door left propped open for ventilation during a meal delivery. Others are engineered over weeks of cold, calculated observation. Denmark's prisons, known for their relative lack of barbed wire and attempts at humane rehabilitation, give Brian just enough slack to hang the entire system. He stays polite. He behaves perfectly for weeks. He lulls the staff into a comfortable, rhythmic routine. And then, the second the authority blinks, he is gone like smoke. By the year 2000, Brian has racked up 15 successful breakouts. The number staggers prison officials across Europe. They try transferring him between facilities, thinking a new environment will throw his internal compass off balance. It does not matter. He is like water, finding every microscopic crack in every container. In one dramatic incident, Brian springs himself from a provincial jail and steals a sedan for a midnight getaway. Prison sirens wail behind him as he floors the accelerator onto a desolate country highway. Minutes later, the red and blue glare of police lights flares in his rearview mirror. Brian pushes the stolen car to its absolute limit, weaving through late-night traffic at 120 kilometers per hour. He is savoring the absurd, crystalline freedom of the moment. Up ahead, a police roadblock materializes, spike strips and squad cars blocking the black asphalt. He swerves wildly, loses control, and the car plows into a ditch with a sickening crunch of metal. Bruised, but fueled by pure adrenaline, Brian crawls from the smoking wreck and bolts into the surrounding woods on foot. Police dogs track him for hours through freezing brambles and marshland before a canine unit finds him shivering under a pile of leaves, exhausted but laughing hoarsely to himself. Another failure, another lesson learned. Then comes 2004, the year Brian executes his most legendary feat of deception. By now, guards shadow his every move, but they cannot keep him in solitary confinement forever. He is assigned to a work crew raking autumn leaves in the exercise yard. Mountains of brown and orange debris are piled into a massive metal shipping container to be hauled off-site. Brian works diligently, shoveling load after load, keeping his head down like a broken man. A bored guard taps his foot nearby, impatient to finish the mundane task. The container fills. A waste truck rumbles through the heavy gates. As the guard turns his back to signal the driver, Brian climbs into the container and buries himself under a crackling blanket of dead foliage. He holds his breath in the suffocating darkness as the forklift hoists the container up. The metal sways as the truck drives out through the gates, past the checkpoints, past the armed guards, past the walls that were supposed to be impenetrable. Miles later, in an empty field, the container tips upward. A mountain of leaves spills onto the ground, and Bo Larsen rolls free with them, grinning from ear to ear, covered head to toe in dead foliage. He gives the dumbfounded driver a cheeky salute and disappears into the woods. By the time the prison realizes their most notorious inmate has evaporated, Brian has already hitchhiked clear across the island. The authority is humiliated once again. The individual is free. December 12th, 2014. Vestra Fengsel, midnight. Bo Larsen is back at the 0 point, buried within the iron heart of Denmark's most secure facility. He is 40 years old now. His face is a permanent fixture on every police bulletin in the country. The guards do not look at him with disdain. They look at him with the hypervigilance of men guarding a ghost. They call him the Escape King, but the title has become a heavy, suffocating crown. Brian pretends to be a broken man. He takes up reading. He speaks softly. He thanks the guards for extra blankets, lulling the authority into the most dangerous trap of all, the belief that they have finally domesticated the wolf. But internally, Brian is orchestrating his masterpiece. For months, he has been a silent scavenger. Piece by piece, night after night, he assembles the anatomy of a legend. He smuggles a hacksaw blade inside the heavy spine of a book. He braids a 17-meter rope ladder from torn bed sheets and laundry lines, hiding the fabric within his mattress like a coiled serpent. He has one shot. If a single guard senses a change in his rhythm, the cage will close forever. Just after midnight, as the roaming footsteps of the night watch fade into the distance, Brian begins the work. The sound of metal on metal is a microscopic scream in the near darkness. He pauses at every floorboard creak, his heart hammering against his ribs. Hour after hour, he saws. By 4 a.m., his forearms burn with lactic acid. Then, a soft, crystalline snap. The last iron bar gives way. The frigid December wind slices into the cell, the taste of freedom flowing in like oxygen. Brian anchors his linen rope to the remaining bars, squeezes his lean 38-kilogram frame through the gap, and ascends hand over hand to the rooftop. Perched above the fortress, his breath fogging in the moonlight, he sees the open horizon. He secures a second rope to a ventilation pipe and begins the descent. A 5-story drop down sheer concrete. Halfway down, the impossible happens. The knotted linen groans and rips. Brian plummets. He smashes onto the asphalt with a sickening thud, his left ankle shattering on impact. Pain lances through his brain, white and blinding. He lies there gasping as a shout erupts from above. "Someone heard that!" Pure grit and adrenaline propel him upward. Limping violently, dragging his broken limb like a dead weight, Brian melts into the shadows of the yard. He scales a secondary fence through sheer primal will and vanishes into the tree line, just as searchlights begin to slice through the dark. He is free. Escape number 22 is a success, pulled off with the tools of a ghost. But this time, the individual is not running toward a new life. He is running toward a total eclipse. Knowing that a national manhunt is closing in, Brian goes all in on destruction. He meets an underworld contact, grabs a sawed-off shotgun, and commits a brazen armed robbery at a supermarket. He is a man with nothing left to lose, brandishing a weapon with a shattered foot and a mind beginning to fracture. With 100,000 kroner in his pocket, Brian enters a spiraling bender. He consumes enough narcotics to kill a horse, shacking up in a rented car with a prostitute, speeding through small towns like a hijacked missile. He is taunting fate, high on the chemical rush of the run. But on December 22nd, the system catches his scent. A high-speed chase through twisting country roads ends in a spectacular wreck as Brian plows through a fence into a private garden. Disoriented, hallucinating, and screaming at phantoms only he can see, the escape king stumbles into a thicket of bushes. When the K9 units finally swarm the scene, they find a pitiful sight. A man in a tattered brown wig, mud-splattered and wide-eyed, shivering in the dirt. A police dog clamps onto his arm, and the authority piles on. As they haul him out, Brian mumbles a final, broken promise. "I'm not going back." But the fight is gone. The 20-second escape ends face down in the mud, the myth finally crushed by the weight of its own legend. The aftermath of the 20-second escape is not a celebration, it is a clinical erasure. The Danish justice system, humiliated for 3 decades, finally decides that the individual must be buried beneath the weight of a flawless authority. There are no more chances for rehabilitation, no more work crews in the yard, and no more autumn leaves. The prison service throws away the metaphorical key, transferring Brian Bo Larsen to the high-security unit of East Jutland. Here, the architecture of the cell is a direct response to his genius. Every bolt is welded, every light fixture is recessed and reinforced. Even the bed and toilet are monolithic extensions of the concrete floor, leaving no gap for a smuggled blade or a braided rope. The system implements a rotating isolation protocol. Guards are ordered to move him constantly, never allowing his mind to map a single environment or memorize a specific rhythm. He is a grandmaster stripped of his chessboard, a contortionist trapped in a box that refuses to bend. Outside the walls, his story ignites a national autopsy of the Danish soul. Parliament debates the Larsen problem, tightening the laws for high-risk inmates and upgrading the perimeter defenses of every fortress in the country. To some, he remains a folk hero, a 38-kilogram ghost who proved that maximum security is a fragile human illusion. To others, he is the ultimate cautionary tale of a life wasted in the pursuit of a horizon he could never quite hold. Now pushing 50, Brian spends his days under the sterile, humming glow of fluorescent lights. He is alone with the only thing the state could never take, his memories. He has spent more than half of his adult life behind bars, a staggering irony for a man whose entire identity was built on leaving them. Each successful escape only served to tighten the knot of the next recapture, a cycle of kinetic brilliance leading to static despair. The authority finally realized that to stop the escape king, they didn't need stronger bars. They needed to remove the world he was running toward. In the end, the legend of Brian Bo Larsen reveals a haunting paradox. He proved that a determined mind can dismantle any physical cage, but he also proved that no one can outrun the architecture of their own shadow. The 22 breakouts were not just acts of rebellion. They were symptoms of a soul that felt most alive only in the 15 minutes between the cell and the forest. Today, as the sun sets over the silent Polish woods where he once ran, and the Danish fortresses stand reinforced in his wake, the truth remains. The system won by turning him into a permanent ghost in a concrete room. But for 22 fleeting moments, the individual was the only thing that was real. The only prison that could truly hold Brian Bo Larsen was the one he built for himself. 22 escapes, one legend. The ghost of Sobibor is finally still. Brian Bo Larsen proved no cage is permanent, but his true prison was the run itself. What would you do for 15 minutes of freedom? Let me know in the comments. Like this video if you believe the individual can always find the crack in the authority. See you in the next deep dive.